are ready.
Came up the next day, just see if there's hats.
I
still on
apologize
track.
for the delay on behalf of everyone. We have some visitors here tonight, so we needed to get some other arrangements ready. So we are unusual in starting our meeting late like this, but it is 6:41. And we are going to begin our Board of Education meeting now. Sarah, will you please call the roll? Mr. File?
Here.
Mr. Gade?
Here.
Dr. Magulius? Here. Mr. Hannah?
Here.
Mr. Jewell?
Here.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Here.
Mrs. Johnson?
Here.
And there are 4 visitors here who wish to speak this evening, and I just want to thank you for your time and for being here. Generally, we do a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker, so thank you for speaking on behalf of the people that you are here with, and whoever would like to go first, you're welcome to come up. Tavis, do we need a microphone for them?
Yep.
Is it set up? Perfect. It's like a wheelie cart.
Okay.
You want me to use this?
You're good. It's just for the street.
Oh, okay. Okay. Hi, my name is Sheila Goldsberry, and I'm definitely not a public speaker, and this is a very uncomfortable situation that I am putting myself in tonight. And I am doing that because I am first and foremost a concerned parent of 3 children in the school district. Illinois policy recently came out and gave the power of mask optional to the school districts. They gave the power for school districts to locally make the decision whether masks would be mandated or optional. And I am here today to urge you to leave it up to the parents to make it a mask optional policy. According to some of the guidelines, some of the different things that local school districts should be working with public health officials on are vulnerability level, and for Sangamon County that is low. Also the level of vaccination coverage, which is high. And also in the last school board meeting, the board approved the shield testing, which is to begin later this month, and testing for K through 12 was also one of the factors in determining mask policy for the school year. So based on these things with the guidelines that were presented, there's no reason to have a mask mandate in our school district, and I urge you to leave it up to the parents. Let us decide what is best for our children.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Melissa Jerome, and my husband and I reside here in Rochester, and we have 2 children that are in the district. So I'm just here to say a few different words about the hot topic with the mask. First of all, though, I want to thank all of you board members, all the faculty, all the administration for all of the hard work that you guys do for us. You put a lot of time and effort into things. And I know a lot of it is probably is gratifying, but then there's things that come up that are not so gratifying. There's things that come up that put stress in your life, just like it does for anybody. And you know, it's not fair to anybody. And I think this decision, the decision for mask, unfortunately, there's no right or wrong answer. There's no cut and dry. And I would hate to be the one that has to have that on me. So I want to tell you guys that we do appreciate your time and also letting us speak. Like I said, there's no right or wrong answer. What's going on in each family's household in regards to health and well-being, none of us know. You may not even know what's going on with a sibling, your neighbor. So how can we make a decision for the whole district? Each child's needs are different, and each family has different concerns and worries about their family and their children. Something to consider and to think about is the importance of nonverbal communication in children. Having a bachelor's degree in psychology and elementary education, I learned firsthand that nonverbal communication with the child has a big effect on their relationships with their family and friends. It also plays a significant part in their emotional development and their sense of worth. Helping children to develop nonverbal communication skills is a sure way to make them a better listener and give them skills needed to express their own emotions in a clear, mature way. I can also tell you from personal experience of having a hearing impairment that facial expressions and nonverbal communication is so important. It's also important to those that can hear perfectly. One report shows that 85% of our communication is nonverbal. That's a lot of communicating without even opening our mouths. I think most of you would agree that. So what happens when our mouths are covered by masks? You can no longer see if I'm smiling. You can no longer see if I'm excited or sad to be here. All of a sudden, it's harder to understand, even if you don't have a hearing impairment. It's nerve-wracking not to be able to see other people's facial expressions or to read lips. The mask is a huge sound barrier. Also, the last thing I want to mention is, can you imagine being that new 5-year-old coming into kindergarten, not being able to meet their teacher in person because of the restrictions of COVID, not knowing where their classroom is because they weren't able to do the meet the teacher night because of different restrictions. Now, a stranger is getting them out of their mommy and daddy's vehicle. Their mouth is covered. All they can see is their eyes. They have a stranger pulling them out of the vehicle to take them into a building they've never been in and be around a person they've never been around. They need to see, we have wonderful teachers. We have wonderful faculty. They need to see those warm, welcome smiles on that first day of kindergarten or any first day. First impression is huge for everybody. Last thing is, I was chatting with a lot of different parents, and some of the parents that are for masks said, my child will be bullied if they have to wear a mask and all these other kids that don't. And I said, that's a valid concern, but I think it can go either way. I think the children that don't wear them could also get bullied by the children that don't wear them get bullied by the children that are. Bullying happens all over. It's never going to go away. We just hope that we can slow it down. And I think this is another way that we can look at this and take a negative into a positive experience and turn it into a learning experience. I think it's great that we educate our kids that we're all different. We all have different views. We all have different opinions. We all have different passion. And that's nothing wrong. It doesn't make me wrong. It doesn't make you wrong or you right. It just means that we're all individual people. And so I think we can take this negative and turn it into a positive. Therefore, I'm asking on the behalf of myself, my children, my husband, and all other families, that you allow the families to make the choice what's right for their family in this district. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Hi. Is this on? Okay. I have several reasons why I feel that masks should not be mandated in the school district. I wanted to first say that I know some of you and I appreciate you. You've worked with my kids. It's been wonderful. I'm going to get emotional. But anyway, thank you. I feel that parents should have the right to decide what's best for their own children because of some of the things that they've already stated. There are things going on in the home that you don't know about, mutations that people don't know about. Like my son has the MTHFR mutation. He can't get rid of toxins. And so when you breathe in your own oxygen, the CO2 levels get really high. And if you're like Timothy, you can't get rid of that. So you have to find a way to detox that out of your body. And I know a lot of you don't know that about kids. You don't know which individual kid has that. And if a parent knows, they know not to send their child with a mask. Other parents want to send their child with a mask. I think that's okay. I think that the parents need to decide. It has been a known fact since the beginning that kids are not super spreaders. That has been stated and proven over and over again, and not just from the United States. It's been different countries that have stated this. They've been studies done, and there have been studies done in South Korea and Iceland, and both found that children were significantly underrepresented. Sorry, I'm nervous. In Iceland, there were children that were under the age of 10 that were tested, and none of them had it. So it's very low that children would get it, that children would spread it. It's been tested and confirmed. Masks are not commonly used right now. Kids are playing all over the United States with them, with their friends. They're going to fairs, they're going to concerts, they're going to all of these places without masks, and they're okay. They're living normal lives and they're surviving. And I don't know that coming into a building with their friends and being forced to wear masks is a good thing for our children. There's a group of parents from Florida who did a study on their children's masks after wearing them for just 6 to 8 hours. They found that the analysis detected 11 dangerous pathogens on the masks that were 6 to 8 hours. That's all they, and our kids wear them weeks sometimes without washing them. And it's sometimes 2 or 3 days, sometimes they wash them every day, but we're subjecting our children to these sicknesses. And I've got a list of them if you would like to see this. One of them is pneumonia. There are resistant to antibiotics, pneumonia, bloodstream infections, meningitis, sepsis, tuberculosis, food poisoning, E. coli. There's one that causes Lyme disease, diphtheria, Legionnaire's disease. These are not something that I want my kids to be breathing in a mask. And I know that some people will choose to do that and they'll wash them every day, and that's great. But I don't want that for my child. This is not only unhealthy for our bodies physically, but it is mentally and emotionally unhealthy as well. Kids need to be able to see expressions like she expressed, not only from their peers, but for teachers. It's hard to understand someone speaking through a mask. And for those who have hearing impairment, they could miss out on a whole lesson if they can't hear, because sometimes they're too shy and scared and they don't want to be made fun of because they can't hear something. And okay, so that's that point. The Illinois School Board does not have legislation power. There's no mandate for children to wear masks right now. There are no laws that are in place to stop school boards from making masks optional. You cannot be sued. ISBE is not a lawmaking body. It is not a health governing body. Everything ISBE does is controlled by state law, 10.5 ILCS. Nothing in state law gives ISBE the power over schools to require masks. Nothing. Therefore, there's one more thing. Dr. Fauci's email, and I know everybody knows him. He's pretty popular. He stated in the very beginning that masks are not really effective at keeping out COVID. He sent a letter to Sylvia, an email that said, masks are really for infected people to prevent them from spreading infection to people who are not infected, rather than protecting uninfected people from acquiring infection. So he said that it might provide some slight benefit if someone coughs or sneezes on you, but other than that, he does not recommend that you wear a mask, particularly since you are going to a very low risk location. Money is
That's time if you can wrap up for us.
okay. I'm just asking, and it says right on the mask box that it does not prevent COVID. So in conclusion, I'm asking you to vote for masks being optional instead of a mask mandate for our children.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, what was your name?
Starla Sampson.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening, guys.
Hello.
I definitely agree with pretty much what they had to say. Absolutely. My name's Dave Weller. My background is in civil engineering. I have a minor in mathematics, not a major, just a minor. So I just want to talk briefly about masks and relative risk and maybe all-cause risk. Kind of like you have a risk of getting hit by a plane right now. Maybe it's 1 in a million, but if you go to an airport, you might have a little bit more risk of running into an airplane. So something I saw in a lot of the studies that produced the efficacious deployment of wearing masks, their statistics were like 68% less infections. So that was a really cool headline because I was definitely thinking, this is not something I want to do. It's very uncomfortable and I can't even work in it for very long without getting kind of tired and irritating, and I'm touching my face more, I'm adjusting it. That can't be good either. So I dove into these a little bit, and I want to kind of see what their population size was and how they did their numbers. And they use relative risk. So in one of them, if you have a 2.1% and you drop down to a 1.2% cases, then you went through a 0.9% change. Now, if you use relative risk, you have a 43.8% drop. Those were the kinds of numbers I was seeing. So understanding the p-value of statistics, or an R-squared number giving you how close is it associated to a line or a U-shaped curve or whatever, it quickly became insignificant. That change is no longer significant. It's not 43%, it's a relative association. That was troubling. So then I started diving into how many years of this have we done? How long have we studied masks? And it turns out 4 decades. 4 decades. Now, why? Why would we do that? Well, in the arena of surgery, we need to make sure that we're not coughing into a wound. And we would also need to make sure that we wouldn't inhale something they have as an infectious disease. And so they studied it rigorously, and they also found out a few more things. One is how long you can have it on your face before you have some defects in your thought process. So if a doctor or a surgeon was taking out your liver and replacing it with something, hopefully a liver, they wouldn't pass out. They wouldn't die. In fact, they have a massive protocol about how to take it off your face. Another person assists, how to get rid of the glove. I mean, it was crazy. That's why they get paid so much, I guess. And so this is one study, and I've got, articles, and you can reference it. You guys all know this. You can, Google something, get to a reputable site, whichever one you're calling reputable, CDC, PubMed, NIH. This one just happens to have all those numbers on here. But anyway, they wanted to review this on purpose. Now, under this absolutely professional guidance, they were able to determine no more than 4 hours. If they have any headaches or anything at all, or they take it off, they have a mask change. And this is under a negative pressure controlled environment where you can't even get anything from the outside. They're constantly pumping in fresh air. So I thought that was noteworthy when it comes to children, throwing them up in the air and playing with them and treating them like Frisbees. Probably not so fantastic for them. It goes on to say that basically all physiological things that you would do go down on a U-shaped curve, significantly down. Numbers like 34%, you're not as good as you were. You're not running at capacity. And this is within seconds to minutes. So you're already not doing so well minutes after putting it on. Your brain's not functioning. Your cerebral cortex is having problems. This next one I wanted to point out, there's a fairly accredited doctor, Peter McCullough. He basically says this isn't something we should do. He's basing it on particle size, and it's 1,000 times smaller than any of the N95. So it does pass. The virus doesn't really care about your mask or, well, honestly, I think I want to get into more harm. So essentially what they were talking about is this research study, and this was a randomized control clinical trial recently published, probably redacted by now. But anyway, and it's 25,000, and they just kind of studied CO2, oxygenization, and what kind of effects that is. It turns out because of the shape of a child, younger children, they're eustachian tube. Younger children are more readily affected by these than adults. That's like 6 times more. So you have a certain CO2 that's in the air, and that's all you can really, if you have any more, you're going to have protocols for removing that and alarms for things going off. This one little boy had, so parts per million, the range that's in the air is 2,000 parts per million. This little boy had 25,000 parts per million. And this was, again, within minutes. And the younger children are affected more. That study is, of course, here. And I'm going to wrap it up because it looks like my time is about to expire.
I'm trying to stretch it. for
Okay,
you.
so I grabbed this today off the CDC website. I think that's the site that we're trusting for deaths and stuff. So if I asked you guys, how many people in 2020 under the age of 17 succumbed to the coronavirus? And you guys would more than likely say 488. 488 kids, according to the CDC in 2020, died from the coronavirus or with it. Do you know how many kids under the age of 17 in 2020 died, period? Anybody know that number? No. That would be 136,716. So for kids under the age of 17, this seems like it may not be that big of an issue. It would seem that there is more harm than good for children. And it would seem that if we made the argument for masks at all, even if it was a 0.9% gain, as far as not catching it, then it would be adults. So I would say give the children the choice so that they can breathe. Thank you. My time's up.
Thank you. We are going to move on in our meeting, and this return to learning plan comes up again later in the meeting. You're welcome to stay here. You're already in here. If there's somebody you want to return to in the other room that this is streaming in, you're welcome to do that. I just want to thank you for your time on behalf of the board. I know they all sit here respectfully quiet, but I know they all thank you for your time. We received a lot of emails today on both sides, and you presented four cases with a lot of information for masks being optional and strongly recommended. So thanks for your time today.
Thank you for allowing us time.
Yes. Okay. We are going to move on through this agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Jewell. Call the roll, please. Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Mr. File,
Yes.
Mr. Hannah,
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias? Yes. Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Gade?
Yes.
Financial reports. Mr. McDermott, will you please present the financial reports?
All right.
Does he need to move up to a microphone?
Yeah. Just right there.
There you go. And Tavis, will you turn that a little bit so that we can get all board members in?
Shoot.
Sorry, guys. Get off the hook over there. We'll take turns. Half on the meeting on this side, half the meeting on this side. Look at Amy, you still got lucky. Okay, you ready, Mr. McDermott?
All right, on the investment report, you can see from May to June, our overall total balances increased by a little over $5.7 million. That variance is normally a negative number, but that number includes about just under $6.6 million in early tax revenue for FY22. So that obviously will go into our balances, but it will not be reflected on the general ledger for FY21, but it will be shown as a deferred liability. The actual variance for the month was a negative $882,000. The reason for the little larger increase in that variance was due in part from the end of the year TRS payments that we have to make to TRS for the July and August payrolls. That is something new. Just in the last year, we had to do that as well. So that's why that variance is a little higher. So other than that, on the investment report, rates obviously are still very low. So any questions on the investment report?
Right?
All right, on the year-to-date fund summary report, these are the unaudited projections. They're not necessarily the actual numbers, but our auditors do start at the end of next week. And it'll probably take them a couple months to do their report. But anyway, in the education fund, our revenues were much better this year than last. Our normal food service revenue on an annual basis is around $600,000, and the expenses are about the same. This year with the federal food service program, that reimbursement for food service was a little over $1.53 million with expenses of roughly $1.2 million. So obviously where the bigger part of the surplus came from that funding source, as well as other federal reimbursements for special education that were more than what was budgeted as well. In the O&M fund, the improved surplus there came on the expense side of things. Our utility costs were under budget by a little over $90,000, as well as our purchase services in the O&M fund were about $30,000 under budgeted numbers. In the transportation fund, it was a combination of both revenue and expense, but we did receive 4 transportation payments, which we had only budgeted 3, as well as less cost on salary due to the beginning of the year, as well as lower fuel cost in the year. So obviously our end of the year position looks much better, but again, those are unaudited numbers. And once that audit is done in the fall, I'll report on that at that time. Any other questions on that?
Okay. Bills, payroll, and treasurer's report are included in your packet for review. Are there any questions on the bills? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the bills, payroll, and treasurer's report as presented?
Make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Jewell.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Hannah. Call the roll, please.
Mr. File? Yes.
Mr. Hannah,
Yes.
Dr. Magulius,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Gage,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell.
Yes.
Okay, we have administrator and director reports included in our packet. Normally, we ask each administrator to just give some highlights. I know some of our administrators walked over to our overflow room for the meeting tonight and are with our parents and community over there. So I'll just say, unless there's anyone here in this room, administrator or director, who wants to give a short anything, the board members all saw those reports and you have access to those, so we can move ahead if that's okay. All right. Did you all have any questions on any of those reports?
One question I can follow up. I'm assuming the dates there, I know it's been a question on the Meet the Teacher things. I noticed that in the case of Mr. Reed, there wasn't a note of that. Has there been anything that we know of that's changed that would prevent those, or is the plan?
Prevent
I think,
Meet the Teacher nights?
yes.
I think we can roll that right into Mr. Cox's superintendent report
All right.
and keep going with that.
Okay.
You ready for me?
Yep, we're ready. Take
All
it
right.
away.
So just to answer that question, Mr. Jewell, we actually had that discussion today. Mr. Reed had asked the question about, Meet the Teacher, visitors, or new student tours. We're certainly leaning toward that direction, but there's a few pieces of guidance that we're looking through. We're going to meet again in the next couple of days to come back to that and see what we can and can't do. And of course, our ultimate goal is to open school on time, full 5 days per week. In regards to the report, much of what I would have, I've written you a few different reports over the last few weeks. So if there's any questions you have on those, I'd be happy to entertain them. But in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into each one of those topics, but there is a topic I wanted to have a brief discussion with the board that was not written in this current superintendent report, and it's regarding personnel and positions, teaching positions specifically. We've had, every time a individual leaves our district, every time a teacher or any employee leaves our district, we look at and analyze, is this a position that needs to be replaced? And the reason being is because we do have a declining enrollment. So as people retire or maybe they resign for other reasons, unrelated reasons, we'll look at that and say, is this something we have the staff to do, or do we need to post that position? After some in-depth discussions with administration, and we had some today on this point, looking at third grade, right now, if we did not hire an additional teacher, third grade class sizes would be at 25 to 26 students per class. If we do hire, you're looking at that being about 21 to 22 students per class. The other reason we've been looking at the declining enrollment, it does come with a financial piece. Right now, we have the finances to make that higher, but I want everyone to be clear. Part of the reason, a large part of the reason, and we're in even better financial standing than typically we would be. We've been in great financial standing in recent years, but we're even better because of the influx in federal funds that will not stay. So the board needs to understand that at some point in the future, whether it's a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now, we're going to see those federal funds go away. That being said, in normal circumstances, could you increase class sizes to that degree, to 25 to 26 at third grade? You could. It's debatable and it's up for debate. Some would disagree with that, some would agree, but it can and it is done. My hesitation is, in the midst of a pandemic where we know we have learning to take care of, learning was disrupted last year, we have a lot of work to do. Is the timing right to do that? The second piece is, depending on where we land on our reopening guidance and how we open schools. But for example, if we go mask strongly recommended, but leave that to personal choice, our responsibility is to have deeper and more layered mitigations. So we would want to try to distance more. We would want to have less, not more, in classrooms, along with other mitigations I'll get to. So that's the lead up to our plan, is to post this position, see if we get a quality applicants, which is another question right now. That it is very difficult to find quality teaching applicants. Everybody's competing for people, but to post that, see what we get. If we do have a quality applicant, we would recommend for hire. And if not, we do have backup plans, but we thought we should try that first as we're looking at these numbers with registrations coming in. Any questions? And that's all I have, unless there's any specific questions on any other pieces other than reopening plans, which we'll touch on that point in the agenda.
Yep, thank you.
That may be his shortest report ever.
Yeah, might be saving it up, watch out.
Talk too soon.
Okay, so we'll move on to old business. We have approval of student handbook updates and COVID specific. After we looked at that last month as a board, we all recommended and the administration obliged, and COVID specific procedures that were included in the draft presented last month have been removed. So are there any further questions on the handbook? Okay, is there a motion to approve the student handbook updates as presented?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson.
Second. Oh, Amy.
Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson.
It's a compliment, not a.
Call the roll, please.
Dr. Magulius?
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Gage?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mr. File?
Yes.
Mr. Hannah?
Yes.
Great. Next on the agenda is the approval of Rochester High School graduation date and location. Mr. Cox, will you please provide the information regarding the transition of date and location for our graduation ceremony?
Yes. So after some discussions, specifically last month's board meeting discussion, we did a little work, and we are prepared to recommend, administration is prepared to recommend that we move the date of graduation, Rochester High School graduation, and the location back to Rocket Booster Stadium. We would need, in order to do this and make sure we can pull off the graduation ceremony, we have to be prepared to move indoors. So graduation would be at Rocket Booster Stadium with a backup plan to move it into the rack. In order to move it into the rack, it would cost us for a floor covering, which is $13,461 would be the floor covering. We do believe we can use this floor covering for other events as well. And of course, it's going to be a cost that lasts us for a long time. This is not something we're going to have to replace very often, especially no more than what we'll use that. The other piece is we would like to move graduation up 1 week. And I believe that date would then be May 22nd. I mean, Mr. Ashbaugh, if he's in the room, can speak to that because there's a pretty good with where school's been starting and where school ends and when seniors are out, there's a pretty good gap between seniors being done and school being done in actual graduation ceremony. Mr. Ashbaugh, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I mean, like the last day of school, do I need the microphone?
Probably the other people won't be on.
The last day of school, jeez. The last day of school is May 18th. So if we didn't have graduation until May 29th, we're talking over 10 days out to graduation. We did decide to leave it on a Sunday. We actually talked about doing a different day of the week, but to avoid sports activities and things like that that are going on near the end, we felt Sunday was the safest bet, and to keep it in the evening time for heat and just move it up a week. So we would just be moving it to that date, and then we would go Rocket Booster Stadium, and then we would just have the rack set up. And if the weather turned bad, we would move inside.
So, and I know we can set the date annually, but we anticipate if there's something to count on, it'll be the Sunday before the Memorial Day weekend Sunday, right?
I would say we would probably just look at each year at our calendar, because one thing we've had, since I've been here, I can only remember maybe once we've had graduation before. We had like 5 snow days and we had graduation before school was out, and that was just kind of weird. So it just was different. So I guess we would just play with the date. When you guys set the calendar, we would set the date at that Sunday after school's out is what I would recommend.
Okay.
Did we look at a cost benefit analysis? I know we asked last time about using UIS and using you have floor coverings, you've got the stage, you got everything that goes into putting it on here. I know we talked about it, did we look at that difference?
I would say if you buy the floor covering after 5 years here of graduation, we would break even with what we pay at UIS to what we're paying here, to rent the stage. And we rented the chairs this year just so they didn't sink in the field if the weather was bad. But even doing that, I would say in approximately 5 years, it would be a wash.
Is capacity approximately the same at the rack?
Oh, I wish JR and them actually before one of the events counted the seats, and it's like 2,200. And when we go to UIS, we can only sell 1,800 tickets. So we're actually having more people.
Board meeting, JR said it's bigger.
Yeah, it's bigger.
Yes.
And the floor coverings they could use for other stuff, right? Just kind of save the floor.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's just that main floor. We're not worried about any, or just that main
So
floor.
The Fine Arts Festival,
Absolutely.
dances.
I want to thank you guys for looking into it. I know
Yes,
that was,
thank you.
that was
I'm excited about it.
I
Mr.
like
Cox?
everything.
Oh, go ahead, Mr.
I
Cox.
think everything about the recommendation is fine, except it permanently strikes me as the wrong word. I'd like to strike permanently and just say we're going to move it, and that's all there is to it.
Okay.
I guess we can reserve the right to change it
Sure.
on a
Permanently
yearly
sounds like
basis.
you
Yeah,
can't
right,
change it.
I
right.
will say if we give up UIS, we probably would not get that date back in the future, the date and time, because it's that date is really
That date,
popular.
Right.
But we could always find something if we had to. Yes, absolutely.
I don't see a reason why having a backup plan in a facility that holds more people that we've paid for locally.
Yeah.
I can't see a recommendation of ever moving it back, but something could come up, I suppose. So
And we have close by parking.
Yes.
Mr. Cox, anything else to add to that before we make a motion?
No, I think that's reasonable recommendation too, just to say we're going to move that because there could be unforeseen circumstances why we would need to move locations.
Okay.
We do meet ADA in both places, right?
Yes.
I was thinking for that crowd we would.
Mhm. Good question. Hey, is there a motion to move the high school graduation ceremony to Rocket Booster Stadium and purchase the proposed floor covering for the rack as presented?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds. And who seconded it? Mr. Gade? Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Gade?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mr. File?
Yes.
Mr. Hannah?
Yes.
Dr. Magulius?
Yes. All right, we are going to move into new business now. And first on the agenda for new business is the discussion and possible action on returning to in-person learning plan. Mr. Cox, can you please provide the board with a review of the return to in-person learning plan?
Sure. So you're right. I was saving up for here, so that short reports that all got moved to this part of the agenda. And I want to start by thanking our speakers who came, but also the individuals who've contacted myself, the board, administration, and just expressed concerns, suggestions, comments, and everything in between. We understand there's no clear-cut answer, and this is not easy times. So the best way I can capture this for everyone is we all have to have a collective understanding that the environment we are in is fluid. Just to speak, from the heart, over the last year was hard. It was incredibly hard for everyone. It was difficult for our kids, most importantly, from in the school setting, but it was also hard on our families. We learned a lot over the course of the last year. I thought back and reflected to where we were then and where we are now. We were having some of the same debates. We were having the mask debate last summer, albeit different. We had discussions about how can we social distance, again, albeit different. And as I thought about that, we've learned a lot over the course of the year. We're in a much, much different position today than we were last summer. Last summer, being in the dark, having competing guidance, wanting to keep our kids safe, but also getting school started, we would get guidance from 2, 3, 4 different agencies. We would make our plans only to adjust them. Oftentimes, as you know, we had 3 and 4 plans for one single event, and a week or two later, we had to change that. As we finished the school year, one of the comments I made, we cannot sustain, no one collectively can sustain another school year this coming year like we did this last year. It was incredibly difficult on our staff, on our administration, on our school board, on our families, and most importantly, on our kids. But by constantly moving. So this summer, we really have taken an approach to be proactive, learn from what we learned last summer, but let's also not rush into a decision. Let's see how the guidance comes out. Let's see all the facts that are in place, and then make the best decision we can based on that. In terms of mitigations, I'm very proud of what Rochester School District has put into place. We have incredible staff, first and foremost, and we've had cooperative families. There's been cooperation between our teachers union and the board and district administration to continue to move forward. And this is in no way meant to disparage any school districts in our neighboring or regionally or statewide or even nationally. But I feel like, our mitigations are as good, if not better, than anybody's. There may be some that are just as good as us, but I feel like we've done a really nice job over the course of the year, from providing meals, delivering meals, to being able to social distance, Binex testing. We were one of the first districts to be able to get the Binex Now testing in place, which was a huge turning point for us. And it's not talked about a great deal, but the Hazel Health Pediatric Telehealth was another good piece and a good turning point that's only going to grow and grow in services for families. So we were able to give families choices and options, and our students choices and options. And that's what takes us to today and where we go, or where we're going. What I can't tell you, and I want to be clear with everyone, is in making a decision, there's 3 ways to make one. The best decision, obviously, is to make the right one. Your number 2 option is make the wrong decision. And then the worst thing you can do is make no decision. As we walk through tonight and we have discussions, I'm not recommending that we're ready just yet to make that, because as I walk through the guidance with you and what options we have as a district to consider, we know it's very likely we're going to get FAQ documents that could certainly change that guidance. An example, two examples I will share. Today, when I had the discussion with Mr. Reed about parent night and visitors, I gave him an answer, and it was an hour later. I said, let's hold on that because we had some new guidance that was sent our way that we need to just walk through, talk about, get some feedback on. This afternoon, just hours before the school board meeting, the American Academy of Pediatrics made recommendations, competing recommendations against the CDC and against the IDPH. So we're left in a very, very difficult position. And I hope everyone appreciates that as a school district. So when you're in a difficult situation and to make difficult decisions, you have to go back to your core principles. And our core principles have never changed throughout this pandemic. It's to maximize in-person instruction to the greatest extent possible while providing for the continuity of instruction. We want our kids in school, and we want our kids in school without being disrupted. What we knew last year, there's a lot we didn't know, and there's still a lot we don't know, but here's what we did know. Learning in isolation was not good for kids. The start and stop of learning was not good for kids. Quarantining was not good for kids. Everybody knows that. Parents, teachers, administrators, and our goal is to keep moving forward from that and keep our kids in school. That may require us to do things we don't like to do, but it's still things we need to do to keep our kids in school. So here's where the phase 5 guidelines are, just a recap. One of the hot topics, and of course we heard some comments tonight on that, is the masking. We have to spend time talking about this, and it is a real deal. But please understand there's so much more than just that goes into these plans, and so much more we have to discuss. And that's why I said we're not ready. It's not just about the masking. It's about all the other guidance we have to parse through to make sure we're able to do everything we can to set up our school district for success, but especially our kids. The next piece of that is it's not just the mask guidance and or all the other guidance that's instilled on us. We have to see what's going on regionally within other school districts as well, because that is a factor. We work together to see how health stats, what policies you're doing, what's our actual health department have to say. So in terms of the vaccination guidance or the mask guidance, I'm sorry, the phase 5 Restore Illinois plan says that anyone who's vaccinated are not required to maintain social distance, or they're not required to wear masks. Now, it does say unvaccinated individuals should wear masks. The next piece is when youth is present, it's recommended, but you do not have to. And there's a big difference between those words shall, should, recommended, strongly encouraged. One thing I will say where masks are, no matter where we land as a school district and no matter where the Board of Education lands, masks are still required on school buses. There is no option for that. We're talking about during the school day, indoors, outdoors. Leading to that, no spectator or mask limitations are in place for indoor or outdoor sports. That being said, unvaccinated individuals are recommended to do that, strongly recommended to do that. Boards can require masks. Boards should strongly encourage unvaccinated to wear masks, but they may allow people to have their own decision. That being said, again, the boards can require that. So to talk about this specific interest or this specific topic in masks, I pause before I say this. I pause before I go here because I don't want this to be taken the wrong way. We spent a great deal of time last summer talking about masks, a great deal of time. We spent a great deal of time talking about busing, lunches, and social distancing. And when we got to school and we got kids in school, we figured those things out and we grew and we evolved because the situation was fluid. So this too, we're spending a lot of time on this, but I feel confident when we get into September and October, no matter what we do, we're going to have kids in school and learning because that's what we got to get our focus back on. Our focus really needs to be on kids had sporadic education that was start and stop, and it was very difficult over the course of the last year. We have to get our eyes back on how are we going to move the needle for student learning. And yes, all of these things come into that, from keeping us in school to how kids feel. There are very great points made on both sides of those issues. Where I stand as superintendent is and to advise the board, because ultimately that's my job. So here's the things to consider as a board. and where I would advise you and advise the thinking and any recommendations I would be prepared to make. As we stand today, I would not make a recommendation to lift any mask mandate in any way, shape, or form. That's in direct violation of any guidance. You do have the ability as a board to strongly encourage mask usage. You have the ability to do that, and there's some nuances. You can strongly encourage it for unvaccinated. You can strongly encourage it for everyone. There are pieces that you can do that. And then the last is you can require a mask mandate for part or all, unvaccinated or vaccinated and unvaccinated. Today, I would land in the middle because it's consistent with the phase 5 guidance. Our health data locally, and it's hard to say our school health data at the moment because we're not in school. We finished the year with very good data metrics. Sangamon County data metrics are positive. Regionally, when we look at what other school districts are doing, what other businesses, what other entities are doing, we would be consistent with that. So my recommendation would be we need to be consistent with where everyone else is. With that stated, we do have a responsibility to have more layered mitigations in place if that's the direction the district is going. One of those layered mitigations would be the COVID shield testing that we would have in place. The other pieces would be options to pediatric telehealth that we put into place. We would still have to take care at looking at distancing, to the greatest extent possible, but not distancing to the point we can't have school. But we do think we have figured that out over the course of the last year. And then last but not least, the board does, and I would ask as a superintendent, we reserve the right and let people know that we may need to require masks. If we get to a spot where we're quarantining a large number of students or we have a large number of cases spiking, our option may be to quarantine mask or take an adaptive pause and stop that actual in-person learning. Between the two, I would rather put the mask on until the numbers go back down. So, to go back to our previous conversation in an agenda item where Mr. File said, let's not lock ourselves into permanently, I would advise you the same on all of the guidelines that we do. Within your report, and to move on, I'm not going to go through the report, but within the report, I wrote about several other pieces to things we have to have in our plan, especially about remote learning, what we can provide for remote learning and what we cannot provide for remote learning. But with that, I'll stop and ask for any questions or entertain any discussion the board has.
One question I know came up publicly on Facebook or whatever was if a child is quarantined at home for any number of days, they do get remote learning from our school. Is that correct?
Let me pull this up. Yes, with some nuances.
If they're quarantined, they are.
Yes, if you're quarantined by the local public health department, or if you're quarantined under the local health department, or you're found medically homebound, we're obligated to provide 5 hours of instruction, 2 hours that would be synchronous instruction.
I just want to make that clear.
Yes. And we are planning for that.
You want to continue?
Well, where I would land on this in this discussion, we have a draft started of return to school guidance. That draft of return to school guidance does include masks are strongly recommended. And to be clear on that, so everyone understands, and I'm speaking not just to the board, but to anybody who may be watching or who may listen to the recording of this, that strongly recommended does leave that to an option. It leaves it to personal choice. And present that plan to the board. I'd like to present that plan to the board in early August after we have the opportunity to get feedback from all of our stakeholders on said plan, and also to be able to monitor additional guidance. I think the worst thing that we could do tonight is make a decision one way or the other, and then 2 days from now, the IDPH comes out with their frequently asked question document, which is a document that does serve as a piece of guidance for us, and it causes us to have to reverse course or change direction. That's where we are today, but we're also having meetings regionally and locally with other school districts and health officials to determine what the best course of action. But I know people are interested where we are and what we're thinking. that's what I would be prepared to recommend this evening, is to, make sure we have layered mitigations in place and to strongly recommend, strongly encourage the use of masking, but not require.
All right, there is other information in the remote learning 21-22 plan. Are there any other questions about any of those pieces and components?
We still don't know anything about sports, really. It'll be a whole thing too.
There was something that came out about outdoor versus indoor.
Yeah, they have,
Yeah.
but it still doesn't tell you.
Right now, the plan is to start sports as scheduled. The all sports policy masks are, I think recommended, but not required, both for indoor and outdoor sporting activities.
So we, tonight, if we do not vote on this now, we can expect a special meeting to occur between now and the start of the school year. Our next board meeting is not scheduled until after the first day of school.
Yes.
So we will have.
If you're voting tonight, you'd be voting almost specifically and exclusively on mask usage. And there's a lot more to that, in my opinion. Not in my opinion, it's fact. There's a lot more to that. It would be prudent to have the meeting the first week of August. That's still well before, that's still before school starts, but that gives us the next few days to look at any anticipated guidance that goes out. And like I mentioned today, the American Academy of Pediatrics released conflicting guidance. Is that going to cause those agencies to move their guidance one way or the other? It didn't the last time, but it doesn't mean it won't this time.
I think that's more prudent.
Anyone else, are you comfortable with that?
Because we may end up having one anyway to reverse course, so I just
I
assume.
hate reversing course. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't like the idea of making a decision, getting buy-in one way or another, and then telling everyone because of new information, new guidelines, new statistics, whatever it might be, that we have to change at that point.
Yeah, I would just really reinforce that no matter where we land, it's fluid, and a rise in cases could cause us to change. But I would rather move forward and deal with that as it comes up and keep us moving forward, and get back on the business of learning.
I think the most important things that people that I'm hearing from, and the rest of the board, I assume, are getting the same things, as obviously masks are a hot topic. I mean, it's an important decision to a lot of families, parents, and kids on both sides. It's not going to be an easy decision. It's not going to be a fun one to make, because it's not going to be right to some people, no matter which way we decide on that. But I think some of the other things that are in there that we can plan on, and that we are planning on, is that we're starting school 5 days. It's Monday through Friday. It's full days. And that if a child is quarantined, they will receive remote instruction during that quarantine.
There is a piece too on quarantine guidance, and there's still a little more questions I have and some discussion, but there is the potential for shortened quarantine if you're double vaccinated, student or staff, but that is dependent on proper mask usage. So people will need to understand that you can still get quarantined as it stands today. You can still get quarantined, and it is dependent on proper mask usage as to the length of your quarantine, if you're vaccinated versus unvaccinated. So those are some things we have to communicate as well.
Okay.
Now, is that proper mask usage for that individual or for all? Because again,
for that individual is the way I understand that, but that's a very good question.
does this impact anything with the COVID shield testing, as far as one of the guidelines on that was that if you were regularly testing and following the masking and social distance guidelines, which in this case, an unvaccinated, anyone in K through 4th grade cannot have that vaccine. If they are choosing if that's their choice and that's what the board approves, how does that work with the COVID shield testing? Are they then
Very
quarantined?
similar. Very similar. They could get a shortened quarantine if they're wearing their masks properly. If they're not, it would be the longer quarantine. It also could be a reduced distance, if I'm remembering correctly. 3 feet versus 6 feet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I ask our staff, what percent have we had that are vaccinated now? Do we
I
know?
don't know that off the top of my head. I can find that out for you, Mr. File, but it's a large number, very large. We've had a great response from staff. We've also had an incredible response from our students. We've hosted 2 clinics now. We had such a great response in our first clinic. We did hold a second clinic and again had great response to that. And that would be something that I would consider as a layered mitigation. If we're going to say that masks are strongly recommended, strongly encouraged, whatever language we would lean on, then we do have to promote and still promote vaccination as your best method and your best mitigation. Obviously, that's a personal choice for individuals, but our district, both for staff and our stakeholders, it's been a good response, especially the clinics we hosted.
Okay, are we all comfortable? It seems like the consensus from the board then is that we're comfortable planning on and watching for a special meeting to be scheduled the first week of August or so.
What I would bring is two documents, and I think we would keep that special meeting just to that topic if at all possible, but 2 documents. One would be our return to school plan. We do have to have that to be able to secure our ESSER 3 money. So it would be the return to school plan would be there. And then also a resolution just stating how we're going to navigate this school year, and to understand that it's going to be fluid, and get some feedback from you all how you'd like to navigate these big decisions, because inevitably there's going to be a few more big decisions once we get past this one in terms of the pandemic.
Will that plan include a little more guidance on the quarantine? Because it seems like it's a little unclear as to who gets quarantined when and how and for how long. And if those people are not wearing masks, they're going to get quarantined longer than other people. Is that going to be in the plan as well?
Depends on, well, I'm trying to keep this plan to 2 to 3 pages versus a book like we had last year. That's a little more consumable. But what we'll do is link to the documents, because we won't have it, like quarantine that's not our choice. So we would link it to any relevant documents or make a really simple document. We have some of those in our health services department. So we can make sure it's there. We're going to have to communicate that.
Do we know if there would be any changes, or can we look into the quarantine provisions again? If it's an optional policy, a student unvaccinated is wearing a mask, is there a potential that their quarantine is longer because we allowed it to be an option and they were around someone who did not have a mask? If that changes anything, I wouldn't think it would, but again, I want to, our role is to look out for all students, and if the decision we're making to make it optional forces a kid who was taking the precautions, family that was taking those precautions, and that was their choice, to then be subjected to additional quarantine days because of a decision they did not make. I just want to know, I want to have that available to us as we make that decision.
Yes, I'll look into that.
I'm also curious how, truthfully, how all of this gets fleshed out, because we can't ask anybody if they are vaccinated or not. So when you're making this, when somebody comes down and tests positive and you're having to make this call, and did somebody wear the mask properly? I mean, it's all dependent on somebody answering a question they don't have to answer, which is, was your child vaccinated?
Well, it's pretty clear for
In the older ages.
Yeah, it's pretty clear for a
Correct.
few of the buildings that they don't have, those kids don't have that
Correct.
option. Families
But
don't.
in the older ages, and truthfully, even for teachers in the K through 4 who could be vaccinated and perhaps have chosen not to, I'm just curious how this is all, not in theory, but in practice, going to work and still be truthful and honor all of the regulations and restrictions that are on us.
The quarantine is ultimately up to the health department. We do not quarantine. Ultimately, the health department's who issues the quarantine order and issues that paper.
Any other questions or statements? Okay. We will move on to 7.2 in our agenda, approval of special education coordinator evaluation instrument. Mr. Cox, please provide the information regarding this instrument.
He's on.
Oh, are you muted?
Sorry, give me one
There
second.
you go. Sure, you gotta switch screens there. My
So-
screen died.
One of the things, this will be something that would be moved to the consent agenda next year. One of the things we need as a district is a Freedom of Information Act public notice plan or form on our district. We follow Freedom of Information Act, but we didn't have a form that really walks people through how to make any Freedom of Information request. We have that made. I brought it to the board for review and approval. This would be something we would update and have reviewed annually. In my experience, there's not a lot of changes to be made. I would put it on the consent agenda, but since this is the first time, I wanted to put it up here for any discussion or questions.
Did we skip past 7.2?
He's on the wrong one.
I think you skipped past 7.2.
Yep. Special education coordinator evaluation
Oh,
instrument.
sorry.
Although you just
Sorry.
presented that, if we can
Yeah.
go out of order, we can
can.
wrap
Well,
that one up.
just hold on that. I won't need to say
Okay.
anything else because it's pretty routine, but
Okay.
this is as well. In short, the evaluation tool that we used for the special education coordinator didn't fit. It was one we used for the principals. And so Mrs. Shaw and Mrs. Wheeler have done work over the course of the last year looking for a tool that they felt was more useful. And that's the whole goal, is the evaluator and the person being evaluated need to find a tool that's useful. We have that, and we're certainly prepared to recommend that as well.
Okay. Any questions?
That's quite a tool.
Yeah.
All right, is there a motion to approve the use of the special education coordinator evaluation instrument as presented?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Call the roll, please. Mr. Gade?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mr. File?
Yes,
Mr. Hannah?
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias? Yes. Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, now, Mr. Cox, the Freedom of Information Act public notice.
I have nothing else to add.
Nothing else to add. Any
We're good.
questions?
We're good.
All right. Is there a motion to approve the Freedom of Information Act public notice as presented?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Jewell.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Hannah. Call the roll, please. Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Mr. File,
yes,
Mr. Hannah,
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias? Yes. Mrs. Reynolds?
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Gade?
Yes.
Okay, next we have Mr. Cox. Will you provide the report for the approval of an individual self-acknowledgement of an agreement for restriction to access school property, athletic, and extracurricular events?
Yes. We had a incident at the end of the year at a softball contest where there was an altercation between a parent and umpire that went on into the parking lot. This was reported by the IHSA. Initially, my initial recommendation was to have a hearing before the board. These hearings do have to be held in public and before the board. And the recommendation was to have this individual removed from all property and extracurricular contest, athletic and extracurricular contest for a period of 1 year. The individual did waive his right to the hearing and requested a meeting to meet with myself and Mr. Bedoris. And in that point, whenever an individual waives their right to the hearing, they at that point agree to any terms that are set forth, any terms that are set forth within that. I can say the meeting started off. We had to work through some things. But it did end on a positive note. The recommendation that I'm prepared to make and that this individual would be self-acknowledging would be a self-imposed ban or removal from district property for a period of up to 6 months. But I want it to be very clear that anytime, not just during those 6 months, but anytime here on after, if there's a removal from a contest or unsportsmanlike behavior in any manner, I will be removing that individual, but also bringing that individual before the board and recommending a year from that date. This is exclusive of that. Are there any questions before I move on?
Nope.
How do we skip all parts? Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. File?
Do we have a president to do about that same thing? So
So out of respect to all parties, it's not my intent, and I know it's not the board's intent to raise any undue concern, and that's why I've been respectful of not using any names here. But I do. It needs to be known that it is required to have, and the individual is aware that it is required that the name is read into the minutes and as part of the motion. Do you have that, or do you need me?
I do not have that.
It would be Robbie Gillespie.
Okay.
Right now, for-
Thank you. And I'll read that as part of the motion.
Yes.
Okay. Are we ready? Any questions? Great. Is there a motion to approve Robbie Gillespie's self-acknowledgement of an agreement for restriction to access school property, athletic, and extracurricular events?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. Call the roll.
Mr. File,
yes,
Mr. Hannah,
Yes.
Dr. Magulius,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Gabe,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell.
Yes.
Okay, we have the first reading of updated and newly written Board of Education policies are included in your packet for first reading. The policy committee meeting will be scheduled in August prior to a recommendation for approval at the August Board of Education meeting. Are there any questions right now? All right. I will entertain a motion to go into closed session for the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees.
Make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. Call the roll.
Mr. Hannah,
Yes.
Dr. Magulius,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Gabe,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Yes, sorry, thank you. And thanks for waiting on that. Okay, great. Okay, action on items discussed in closed session. We have the approval of the personnel report. Is there a motion to approve the personnel report as presented?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Call the roll, please.
Mrs. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Gade,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Mr. File,
Yes.
Mr. Hannah,
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds.
Yes.
Is there a motion to keep all written minutes of closed session minutes closed? Of closed session
I'll
closed.
make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Call the roll.
Mr. Gade,
Yes.
Mr. Jewell,
Yes.
Mr. File,
Yes.
Mr. Hannah,
Yes.
Dr. Magoulias,
Yes.
Mrs. Reynolds,
Yes.
Mrs. Johnson.
Yes.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
This meeting is adjourned at